Every empire convinces its people that its money is safe. Every government persuades them that its promises will last forever. And every time history slaps them with the truth. From Rome to France. From the Confederacy to modern-day Lebanon. People have woken up one morning to find their savings their money reduced to scraps of paper, and their futures destroyed by systems they once believed were solid. Collapse is the rule. The real question is not whether financial systems will fail. The real question is how you protect yourself when they do. The illusion of permanence is the most dangerous financial mistake one can make. We look at our bank balances and national currencies and want to believe they are rock solid. But money is not rock. Money is trust. And trust can disappear overnight. That is why history is both brutal and incredibly useful. Every collapse is filled with traces of lessons, patterns, and warnings about what truly preserves wealth and what turns to dust if you know how to read them. And if you look closely, you will see this. The ones who survived these disasters were not the ones who trusted the most. They were the ones who questioned first. Let's talk about the Byzantine Empire. It is usually remembered as the eastern half of Rome that managed to survive for another 1,000 years after the Western Empire collapsed. At the heart of its economy was the gold solidisa, coin accepted without question by merchants across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. For centuries, it was the closest thing the medieval world had to a global reserve currency. But here is the part longtime viewers will appreciate. They should have learned from Rome's earlier disaster with the silver denarius, which emperors debased again and again until it was little more than tin with a silver coating. We've told that story before. But no, centuries later, the Byzantines made the same mistake with gold. They reduced its purity, thinned it out, and mixed in cheaper alloys. At first, no one noticed. Then, trust cracked. The coin that had anchored Mediterranean trade became little more than a political fiction. Debasement destroyed its credibility, and with it, the Byzantine economy lost the stability it once enjoyed. So what survived? Not paper promises, not government decrees. Merchants who had quietly accumulated real gold or land beyond imperial reach preserved their wealth, while everyone else watched their money evaporate. This is the first timeless lesson. Governments cannot resist the temptation to dilute their money, and when they do, real value flees to assets they cannot counterfeit. But not every collapse is caused by rulers manipulating currency. Sometimes shocks arrive without warning. In the mid-14th century, Europe was struck by the most devastating pandemic in its history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, nearly half of Europe's population died. Cities emptied, villages vanished, and trade routes collapsed. Yet the economic story of the plague is more complex than simple catastrophe. When half the labor force disappears, labor becomes valuable. Survivors can demand higher wages. Food and land become relatively abundant compared to people. Families with liquidity, silver, goods, or simply the ability to work gained bargaining power beyond anything they had known before. Land that once cost a fortune could be bought for almost nothing. Houses stood abandoned. Fields lay on. It was a buyer's market. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, it should. During the COVID pandemic, we saw a modern version of the same pattern. Supply chains broke down. Governments printed trillions to keep the system alive. And a wave of inequality followed where those with liquidity accumulated assets, while wage earners fell behind. In the United States, housing prices soared. Stock markets rebounded almost instantly, while millions struggled just to pay rent. The rhyme is clear. Pandemics redistribute wealth. They always have. Survivors of the Black Death used scarcity to climb the social ladder. Survivors of COVID with liquidity bought up properties, stocks, and businesses others could no longer hold on to. The lesson is uncomfortable but true. Crises reward those with reserves and punish those without them. The banking collapse of Renaissance Florence shows us another crucial truth. Institutions that appear too big to fail can fall like dominoes. In the 1340s, Florence was Europe's financial capital, home to powerful banking families like the Bardi and Peruzzi. These houses had lent enormous sums to kings most disastrously to England, King Edward III, who defaulted during his wars with France. When payments stopped, The banks collapsed. Depositors were ruined. Trade froze. Once wealthy Florence descended into chaos. What did people learn? That too big to fail is a lie as old as finance itself. Institutions exist to generate profit, not to guarantee your survival. When they fall, they take your savings with them. This lesson has repeated every century, from Florence to Lehman Brothers in 2008, to Lebanese banks freezing accounts in 2019. The American Civil War is usually remembered for its battles, politics, and the abolition of slavery. But behind the gunpowder and speeches was a brutal financial war most Americans barely understand. Both the Union and the Confederacy discovered that wars of that scale require printing money. In the North, the government issued greenbacks paper currency backed not by gold, but by the promise of the United States. At first, it seemed like a bold experiment, but as more money flooded the economy, its value fell. Trust eroded. What mattered in that collapse was not paper promises, but tangible assets. Land, food, gold, anything real held value. For ordinary people, it was devastation. For opportunists, it was a chance to acquire wealth at fire sale prices. America has already lived through a currency collapse, and protection did not come from trusting paper, but from holding value the system could not inflate away. France offers another brutal example of how revolutions can destroy money faster than wars. In the 1790s, assignats were issued, supposedly backed by confiscated church lands, but uncontrolled printing destroyed their value. Prices exploded. Farmers refused to accept paper money. Bread riots returned to Paris. The winners were not those holding patriotic paper, but those holding food, gold, and property. The same lesson resurfaced in the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Thailand's baht collapsed, triggering a chain reaction across the region. Debts doubled, unemployment surged, and ordinary citizens suffered the most. Those who held dollars survived. Borrowing in someone else's currency is a death trap. This story is still being written today. In Lebanon, banks locked their doors. Deposits were frozen. The currency lost more than 90% of its value. Lifetimes of savings vanished. Those who survived were the ones who exited the banks early or held real assets. History tells us this. Protection does not come from blind trust, but from real assets, real skills, and an honest acceptance of how fragile systems truly are. Collapse is both tragedy and opportunity. For the unprepared, it is ruin. For the prepared, it is the moment wealth changes hands. So here is the question. When everything falls apart, will you be holding promises or something real? Until we meet again, between the shadows of the past and the realities of the present.